The first gunshot of the evening echoed through Willow Creek like thunder. But it wasn't the sound that made Eleanor Thorne freeze on the boardwalk, it was the all-too-familiar snickering that followed. At 6 feet tall in her stockings, Eleanor towered over every woman in the Montana Territory and most of the men, a fact that the town never let her forget. The year was 1875, and being a tall woman was nearly as troublesome as being no woman at all. "Look at her, stretching up to the heavens like she's hoping God might just pluck her from this earth," shouted one of the saloon girls, barely 5 feet herself and meaner than a rattlesnake. Eleanor kept walking, chin high despite the burning in her cheeks. Her mother had always told her that her height was a blessing, though at 22, that blessing felt more like a curse that kept potential suitors at bay and made her the target of every cruel joke in town. "You'd best hurry along, Miss Thorne," called out Mr. Peterson from his general store. "Storm's coming in from the west. Reckon you'll see it before the rest of us, being so close to the clouds and all." His laughter followed her down the street. Eleanor clutched her packages tighter to her chest. 6 years since her parents had died of fever, leaving her the modest dress shop that barely kept her fed. 6 years of enduring the whispers, the jokes, the rejection. She had learned to make herself smaller, hunching her shoulders, sitting when others stood, wearing flat shoes that dug into her feet, but nothing changed how others saw her. The wind picked up as she rounded the corner, nearly taking her bonnet with it. That's when she saw him for the first time. He stood by the livery stable, tall and broad-shouldered, brushing down a magnificent chestnut stallion. His dark hair curled around the brim of his hat, and even from a distance, Eleanor could see the strength in his arms as he worked the brush in long, sure strokes. She paused, momentarily forgetting the taunts that had followed her through town. The stranger must have felt her gaze because he looked up suddenly, his eyes meeting hers across the dusty street. For a moment, neither moved. Then he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Eleanor felt her cheeks flame hotter than before, but this time for an entirely different reason. She ducked her head and hurried past, not daring to look back, though she could feel his eyes following her. By the time she reached her small shop with living quarters above, the first raindrops were falling, fat and heavy. Eleanor quickly unlocked the door, slipping inside just as the sky opened up. She lit a lamp and set her packages on the counter, trying to shake the stranger's smile from her mind. The shop was quiet and still, smelling of fabric and thread and the lavender sachets she tucked between the folded garments. It was her sanctuary from the cruelty outside, the one place she never felt too big or too awkward. Her fingers trailed across a bolt of blue calico as she moved toward the back room to prepare her evening meal. A sharp knock at the door startled her. The closed sign was clearly visible. Who would be calling at this hour, especially in such a downpour? Cautiously, Eleanor moved to the door and pulled back the small curtain. The stranger from the livery stood on her porch, water streaming from his hat and coat. Her heart jumped to her throat. "Miss." His voice carried through the door, deep and steady. "Begging your pardon, but I've got a package that got soaked through. The fellow at the general store said you might have some dry cloth to wrap it in before it's ruined completely." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before unlocking the door. The storm wind pushed it open wider than she intended, and the stranger stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of rain and horses, and something else, something clean and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "Thank you kindly," he said, removing his hat. Water dripped onto her clean floor, but Eleanor hardly noticed. Up close, he was even more striking. His eyes were the clear blue of a summer sky, and despite being soaked through, he stood tall and straight, taller than her by at least 3 inches. "I'm Ethan Young," he said, extending his hand. "Just arrived in town yesterday." Eleanor took his hand, conscious of how her own nearly matched his in size. "Eleanor Thorne, this is my shop." His grip was firm but gentle, and he didn't release her hand immediately. When he did, it was with obvious reluctance. "It's a fine establishment you have here, Miss Thorne." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly self-conscious. Did he notice how she had to look him in the eye rather than up at him? Would the joke start now? But Ethan showed no sign of mockery as he placed a sodden paper package on the counter. "It's a gift for my sister back east. Birthday present. Thought I'd mail it tomorrow, but this rain had other ideas." Eleanor moved toward a shelf of muslin. "This should keep it dry until you can rewrap it properly." She measured and cut a generous piece, careful to keep her back straight and her movements graceful despite her nerves. "Much obliged," Ethan said, watching her work. "You're quite skilled with those shears." "A dressmaker should be," she answered, then immediately regretted her shortness. But years of defensive habits were hard to break. If Ethan noticed her tone, he didn't show it. Instead, he unwrapped his sodden package to reveal a small wooden carving of a horse, exquisitely detailed. "Made it myself," he explained, almost shyly. "Margaret always loved horses, even though city life doesn't afford much opportunity for riding." Eleanor handed him the muslin, their fingers brushing. "It's beautiful work." "Thank you." He wrapped the carving carefully. "I've taken a position with Mr. Sullivan at the ranch north of town. Foreman, starting tomorrow." "That's quite an accomplishment for someone new to the area," Eleanor observed, genuinely impressed. Sullivan's Double S Ranch was the largest in the territory, and the owner was known to be particularly selective about his hands. Ethan smiled that warm smile again. "Been working cattle since I was 14, all over from Texas to Montana." Sullivan seemed to think that was qualification enough. He secured the package and returned it to his coat pocket. "I should let you get back to your evening. Thank you for your kindness, Miss Thorne." He moved toward the door, and Eleanor felt a curious disappointment. It had been so long since she'd had a conversation with anyone who didn't make her feel like a curiosity. Ethan paused with his hand on the doorknob, turning back to her. "I don't suppose." "That is, would you permit me to call on you sometime, Miss Thorne? Perhaps Sunday after church?" Eleanor's heart stuttered. Was he mocking her? But his expression held nothing but sincere interest and a touch of nervousness. Yes," she found herself saying before she could reconsider. "Yes, that would be nice." His smile widened. "Until Sunday, then." With a tip of his hat, he was gone back into the rain, leaving Eleanor standing in the middle of her shop wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. Eleanor spent Saturday in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between excitement and dread. What if this was all an elaborate joke? What if he'd made a wager with the other cowboys to court the giantess of Willow Creek? She chose her church dress with particular care, a dove gray cotton with white collar and cuffs that she had sewn herself. It was modest and practical, but the cut emphasized her narrow waist, and the color complemented her auburn hair. For once, she resisted the urge to hunch her shoulders as she walked to church. Ethan was waiting outside the small white clapboard building, freshly shaved and wearing a clean suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Several townspeople were already staring and whispering behind their hands. The handsome newcomer waiting for the too tall spinster was certainly cause for gossip. "Miss Thorne," he greeted her, offering his arm. "You look lovely this morning." Eleanor placed her hand on his arm, conscious of the eyes watching them. "Thank you, Mr. Young." They entered the church together, and Eleanor braced herself for the usual snickering. It came, but Ethan either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. He guided her to a pew with such natural courtesy that for a moment, Eleanor forgot to be self-conscious. After the service, Ethan suggested a walk by the creek that gave the town its name. They strolled along the bank, the late April sunshine warming their shoulders. Eleanor waited for the moment when the joke would be revealed, when Ethan would join the ranks of those who found her height amusing rather than attractive. But that moment never came. Instead, Ethan spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his years working cattle drives, his dreams of someday having a ranch of his own. He asked about her dress shop, listened intently to her descriptions of the latest fashions from the East, and seemed genuinely impressed by her skill. My mother taught me, Eleanor explained as they sat on a fallen log overlooking the water. She was a seamstress before she married my father, said a woman should always have a way to support herself, even if she's fortunate enough to find a good husband. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, Ethan said. My father said something similar about a man needing to master a trade beyond just cowboying. That's why he taught me woodworking. Their conversation flowed easily, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in his company. It wasn't until they were walking back toward town that the spell was broken. Well, look at that. Young's found himself a woman who can look him in the eye. The voice belonged to Frank Miller, one of the hands from the Double S Ranch. He and two other cowboys stood outside the saloon, clearly having started their Sunday drinking early. Eleanor stiffened, the familiar shame washing over her. But before she could react, Ethan stepped forward, his posture suddenly intimidating despite his Sunday best. You've had too much to drink, Miller, he said, his voice low and controlled. I suggest you go sleep it off before you say something you'll regret tomorrow, Miller sneered. Just making conversation, boss. Ain't every day a man finds a woman who could wear his clothes without hemming them first. Ethan moved so quickly that Eleanor barely saw it happen. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Miller by the collar, lifting him slightly off the ground. Miss Thorne is a lady, Ethan said, each word precise and cold. You will address her with respect or not at all. Do I make myself clear? Miller's face had gone pale. He nodded jerkily and Ethan released him with a slight shove. That goes for all of you, Ethan said to the other men who were now looking significantly more sober. Spread the word. I won't tolerate disrespect toward Miss Thorne or any other lady in this town. He returned to Eleanor's side and offered his arm again as if nothing had happened, but something had changed. The look he gave her was protective, yes, but there was something more in his eyes, a warmth that made her breath catch. I apologize for the interruption, he said softly as they continued walking. Eleanor found her voice. Thank you, but you didn't have to do that. I'm used to it. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her directly. That's what makes me angriest of all, that you've had to get used to it. His sincerity was unmistakable, and Eleanor felt a knot of emotion tighten in her throat. No one had ever defended her like that before. That Sunday was the first of many meetings. Ethan called on Eleanor regularly, sometimes bringing small wooden trinkets he had carved, a delicate rose, a tiny bird, a perfect miniature of her shop front. Eleanor began to look forward to his visits with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to hope for any kind of romantic attachment, but the town continued to talk. The jokes changed slightly, but never disappeared entirely. Now they wondered aloud what a fine-looking man like Ethan Young could possibly see in the too tall dressmaker, speculating about his motives with cruel certainty. He's just passing through, Eleanor overheard Mrs. Whitley tell her friend at the mercantile. Cowboys never stay in one place long. He's amusing himself with her because she's a curiosity, nothing more. The words stung because they echoed Eleanor's own deepest fears. Ethan had become so important to her, but what if the gossips were right? What if his interest was merely temporary, a diversion until something better came along? These doubts were foremost in her mind when Ethan invited her to the town's Founders' Day dance in late May. The annual celebration was the social highlight of the spring, with musicians brought in from the county seat and decorations that transformed the town hall into something almost elegant. I don't dance, Eleanor told him flatly when he extended the invitation. Ethan looked genuinely puzzled. Never learned or don't enjoy it. Eleanor sighed, setting aside the shirt she was mending for him, one of many small services she had begun providing, partly as an excuse to see him more often. I learned as a girl, she admitted. But the last time I attended a dance in Willow Creek, I was 18. Bobby Peterson asked me to dance, and then led me to the middle of the floor where his friends were waiting. They all laughed and said they wanted to see if I could dance without hitting my head on the ceiling. Anger flashed across Ethan's face, quickly replaced by tenderness. He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "Eleanor," he said softly. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart flutter. "I would never let anyone hurt you like that, but I understand if you don't want to go." The disappointment in his eyes was genuine, and Eleanor found herself reconsidering. Perhaps it was time to stop letting old hurts dictate her choices. "I'll go," she said finally, "but I reserve the right to leave at the first sign of trouble." Ethan's smile was radiant. "That's more than fair." "And Eleanor, I promise you won't regret it." The night of the dance arrived clear and warm, with a full moon illuminating the streets of Willow Creek. Eleanor had worked for weeks on her dress, a deep green silk she had been saving for a special occasion, with a modest bustle and delicate lace at the throat and wrists. She had even splurged on new shoes, still practical but with a slight heel that emphasized her already considerable height. As she examined herself in the small mirror above her washstand, Eleanor made a decision. Tonight, she would not hunch her shoulders or try to make herself smaller. Tonight, she would stand tall, as nature intended. Ethan arrived promptly at 7, looking so handsome in his dark suit that Eleanor momentarily lost her nerve. But the admiration in his eyes when he saw her restored her confidence. "You are a vision," he said, his voice slightly husky. "That color brings out the gold in your eyes." The town hall was already crowded when they arrived, lanterns casting a warm glow over the festivities. The musicians were playing a lively tune, and several couples were already dancing. Conversations paused as Eleanor and Ethan entered, and the familiar sensation of being stared at washed over her. But Ethan's hand was warm on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd with easy confidence. They had barely reached the refreshment table when Bobby Peterson approached, his wife Mary on his arm. Eleanor tensed, preparing for some cutting remark, but Bobby merely extended his hand to Ethan. "Young, good to see you," he said cordially. "Sullivan tells me you've doubled productivity at the North Pasture, says you're the best foreman he's had in years." Ethan shook his hand. "Just doing my job." Mary Peterson, a tiny woman with a notorious sharp tongue, looked Eleanor up and down. "That's a lovely dress, Miss Thorne." "Did you make it yourself?" Eleanor nodded, waiting for the barb that would surely follow such a benign opening, but Mary surprised her. "I've been meaning to come by your shop. I need something special for my sister's wedding next month, and no one has your eye for detail." The conversation continued, amazingly free of any reference to Eleanor's height. When the Petersons moved on, Eleanor looked at Ethan questioningly. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. Ethan's expression was all innocence. "I have no idea what you mean." "Bobby Peterson hasn't spoken a civil word to me in years, and now he's making small talk as if we're old friends." Ethan took a sip of punch before answering. "I might have had a few conversations around town, reminded folks that respect costs nothing but pays dividends." Before Eleanor could press him further, the music changed to a waltz and Ethan set down his cup. "May I have this dance, Miss Thorne?" His formality made her smile despite her nervousness. "You may, Mr. Young." He led her onto the dance floor, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers with gentle pressure. Eleanor was acutely aware of the other dancers, of the eyes watching them, but as Ethan began to guide her through the steps, the world narrowed to just the two of them. He was an excellent dancer, leading with confidence but without force. Eleanor found herself following easily, her body remembering the steps her mother had taught her so many years ago. "You move like a dream," Ethan murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "So do you," she replied, surprised by how true it was. Despite his size and strength, Ethan had a natural grace that made dancing with him a joy. They danced song after song, and gradually, Eleanor noticed something extraordinary. People had stopped staring. Couples smiled at them as they passed. Mrs. Sullivan even gave her an approving nod. During a break in the music, Ethan led Eleanor outside to the small garden behind the town hall. The night air was cool after the warmth of the dance floor, and the scent of spring flowers hung heavy around them. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. Eleanor nodded, too full of happiness to speak. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box intricately carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "I made this last week." Eleanor took the box, running her fingers over the delicate carvings. "It's beautiful, Ethan." "Open it," he urged softly. Inside, nestled on a small cushion of velvet, was a silver pendant in the shape of a heart, suspended from a fine chain. "Ethan," Eleanor breathed, lifting the necklace from the box. "I don't know what to say." "There's an inscription on the back," he told her, his voice suddenly nervous. Eleanor turned the heart over. In tiny, perfect letters were the words, "You are the height of my heart." Tears sprang to her eyes as she looked up at him. "Ethan." He took her hands in his, the box and necklace cradled between them. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. When I first came to town, I heard the whispers about the tall dressmaker before I ever laid eyes on you. People thought they were warning me away, but all I could think was that I might finally meet a woman who wouldn't make my neck ache when I talked to her." A laugh escaped through Eleanor's tears. "And then I saw you," Ethan continued, his voice growing more serious, "and height had nothing to do with it anymore. I saw your grace, your dignity in the face of cruelty. I saw how carefully you measured that muslin for a stranger in need. I saw your kindness, your skill, your strength." He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Every day since then, I've seen more reasons to admire you, to care for you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "To love you." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop. "Love?" Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you, Eleanor Thorne. Your height is part of you, yes, but it's just one small part of the woman I've come to adore." He gently took the necklace from her trembling fingers. "May I?" Eleanor nodded wordlessly, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. The silver heart rested just below her collarbone, cool against her flushed skin. When she turned back to face him, Ethan took both her hands in his again. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Eleanor, and if you'll give me time, I hope to prove that love to you every day." Eleanor looked up at this man, this wonderful man who saw her as she truly was and loved her for it. "I love you too, Ethan," she whispered. "I think I have almost from the beginning." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Ethan leaned down and kissed her. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss tender and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, Eleanor kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the feeling. When she opened them, Ethan was watching her with such adoration that it took her breath away. "We should go back inside," she said reluctantly. "People will talk." "Let them," Ethan replied, but he offered his arm to escort her back to the dance. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and laughter and stolen glances. When Ethan walked Eleanor home, they lingered on her porch, reluctant to part. Sunday after church. He asked, holding both her hands in his. Eleanor nodded. "I'll make a picnic." He kissed her again, longer this time, before finally bidding her good night. Eleanor watched him walk away, her fingers touching the silver heart at her throat. The next weeks brought a profound change to Eleanor's life in Willow Creek. The mocking comments ceased almost entirely, replaced by cautious friendliness from most townspeople. Whether this was due to Ethan's conversations or simply the undeniable evidence of his genuine affection for her, Eleanor couldn't say, but she welcomed the peace. Her dress shop flourished as well. Women who had previously avoided her establishment now sought her out, praising her workmanship and asking her advice on fashion. Eleanor suspected that Ethan's rising status as Sullivan's right-hand man had something to do with this newfound popularity, but she couldn't deny that it was pleasant to be treated with respect after so many years of ridicule. As spring turned to summer, Ethan's visits became a cherished constant in Eleanor's life. They picnicked by the creek, attended church together, and spent long evenings on her porch swing, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan spoke more of his dreams for his own ranch, and Eleanor found herself imagining a future where those dreams included her. On a warm evening in late July, Ethan arrived at Eleanor's shop just as she was closing for the day. His expression was more serious than usual, and a flutter of anxiety rose in her chest. "Is everything all right?" she asked as she locked the shop door. Ethan nodded, though his customary easy smile was absent. "I need to show you something. Can you come with me now?" Puzzled but trusting, Eleanor agreed. Ethan had brought his wagon rather than riding horseback as he usually did, and he helped her up onto the seat with careful hands. They drove north out of town, following the road that led to the Sullivan Ranch. But before they reached the main house, Ethan turned onto a smaller track that wound through a stand of cottonwoods toward the foothills. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked, curiosity overcoming her concern. "You'll see," Ethan replied mysteriously, though now a hint of excitement had replaced his earlier gravity. The track ended at a clearing beside a small, swift-running stream. A half-built cabin stood on a gentle rise, its log walls reaching about chest-high. Building materials were stacked nearby, and the foundations for what looked like additional structures stretched out behind. Ethan brought the wagon to a halt and helped Eleanor down, his eyes never leaving her face. "What is this place?" she asked, though a suspicion was beginning to form. "It's mine," Ethan said simply. "Sullivan sold me this parcel last month. 200 acres, water rights to the stream, good grazing land beyond those trees." Eleanor stared at him, her heart beginning to race. "Your ranch," he nodded, taking her hand and leading her toward the half-built cabin. "I've been working on it every spare moment. The main house here, a barn over there, corrals beyond. It's small to start, but there's room to grow." They stopped at what would eventually be the front porch. Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know what people said when I first started calling on you," he said softly. "That I was just passing through, that cowboys never stay in one place long." He gestured to the cabin. "I'm staying, Eleanor. I'm putting down roots right here." His eyes, so blue and earnest, held hers. "The only question is whether you're willing to put down roots with me." Before Eleanor could respond, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. When he opened his hand, a simple gold ring lay on his palm. "Eleanor Thorne," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident on his face, "I love you more than I ever thought possible. You are the height of my heart, the measure of my soul. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she looked from the ring to Ethan's beloved face. All her life, she had believed her height would prevent her from finding love, that she was destined to stand alone, too tall and too awkward for a man to want. But here was Ethan, offering her not just his love but a future, a home they would build together. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." His smile outshone the setting sun as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. Then he wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around in a circle of pure joy. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at once. Ethan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt it in every corner of her being. "I want you to help me finish the cabin," he said when they finally parted. "It should be a home for both of us from the very beginning." Eleanor looked around at the clearing, already imagining curtains at windows, a garden by the stream, children running across the grass. "When?" she asked, practical despite her happiness. "I was thinking September," Ethan replied. "That gives us time to finish the house and for you to make whatever arrangements you need with the shop." "September," Eleanor agreed, resting her head against his shoulder as they stood together in the fading light, planning their future. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek. To Eleanor's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Mrs. Sullivan organized a sewing circle to help with Eleanor's wedding dress. Mr. Peterson offered lumber from his mill for the cabin's interior finishing. Even the saloon girls, who had been among her cruelest tormentors, brought a quilt they had pieced together as a wedding gift. The wedding itself was held on the first Saturday in September, a perfect late summer day with clear skies and gentle breezes. Eleanor wore a gown of ivory silk that she had designed herself, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that accentuated her height rather than disguising it. At Ethan's insistence, she wore her hair loose around her shoulders, crowned with a wreath of wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadow near their new home. As she walked down the aisle of the small church toward Ethan, Eleanor held her head high. Gone was the woman who had hunched her shoulders and tried to make herself invisible. In her place stood a bride who knew herself to be loved completely, height and all. Ethan watched her approach with undisguised adoration, his eyes never leaving hers as she came to stand beside him before the minister. When it came time to speak their vows, his voice rang clear and true through the church. "I, Ethan, take thee, Eleanor, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Eleanor repeated the words, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When Ethan slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, she felt as if her happiness was complete. The minister pronounced them man and wife, and Ethan kissed her with such reverence that several of the ladies in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. Then, hand in hand, the newlyweds walked back down the aisle and out into the sunshine, where the town of Willow Creek waited to celebrate with them. The cabin, now a proper home with windows, doors, and a sturdy roof, welcomed them that evening. Ethan carried Eleanor across the threshold as tradition demanded, setting her down gently in the main room that would serve as both kitchen and living area. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," he said softly, his arms still around her waist. Eleanor looked around at the home they had built together, the furniture Ethan had crafted with his own hands, the curtains she had sewn, the quilt from the saloon girls spread across their marriage bed in the small adjoining room. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. "Everything is perfect." Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Ethan's arms around her and her head pillowed on his chest, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known before. Here, with this man who loved every inch of her, she had finally found where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. "I was thinking about the first time you defended me when Frank Miller made that comment about my height." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I wanted to do more than just frighten him that day." "I'm glad you didn't," Eleanor said, propping herself up to look at him in the faint moonlight coming through the window. "But what you did changed something for me. No one had ever stood up for me like that before." Ethan traced the line of her cheek with tender fingers. "I'll always stand up for you, Eleanor, and beside you, and with you." She kissed him then, pouring all her love into the gesture. When they parted, she settled back against him, content. "Do you know," Ethan murmured, sleep beginning to color his voice, "the first thing I noticed about you wasn't your height at all." "No," Eleanor asked, surprised. "No, it was the way you walked down that street with your chin up despite the whispers. Your courage, that's what caught my eye first." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "And here I thought it was my towering stature." Ethan laughed softly. "Well, I won't deny that was a pleasant bonus. Makes it much easier to do this." He kissed her forehead without having to shift position. "And this," he kissed the tip of her nose. "And especially this." His lips found hers again in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and understanding. Outside their window, the Montana night spread like a blanket over their new home, stars winking like benedictions in the vast sky. Inside, Eleanor Young slept in her husband's arms, no longer too tall, no longer mocked, but exactly, perfectly the height of his heart.